Hello, and welcome back from the networking break. I hope you had some interesting connections and chit-chat. I'm Isabella Kaminska, Senior Finance Editor at POLITICO. And before we start, I just want to remind you all about the swap card platform. Excuse me, and cough a little bit. So if you are in the room, you can scan the QR code on the screens, otherwise check instructions on our event website. If you're already on the platform, feel free to chat with fellow attendees and ask questions in the question box to the right of the screen on a desktop. Excuse me. And below the live stream if you are viewing on your mobile. Just going to have a bit of water because clearly there's something in my throat. And I also want to remind you all to is it Xing, tweeting, whatever it used to be. We like debate, so please promote as much as possible. So we're going to have an excellent panel now about whether the UK is a land of opportunity or not. We've heard about the prospects for the UK economy. We've heard from Andrew Griffith that there's all sorts of opportunity, but now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of whether that's actually true. And joining me is a really great panel. On my immediate left, on my left is Gillian Flores, who is going to be representing the voice of the hedge fund industry as she's head of global government affairs at MFA. To her left is Tom Keating, who I would describe as the UK's premier or at least go-to expert on financial crime. Not to suggest he is good at financial crime, but just knows a lot about financial crime at RUSI. And on my far left, again, no reference to political leanings or anything. Emily Shepherd, Chief Operating Officer and Executive Director of Authorizations at the Financial Conduct Authority. So now that's out of the way, I thought we would just start off with the proposition of the panel discussion, which is the UK a land of opportunity? Gillian, you represent the hedge fund industry. I think you're a good place to start. How is the hedge fund industry viewing all the post-Brexit change?
Isabella, thank you for having me. Thank you to Politico for putting this on, and thanks for the question. I think a great place to start, certainly an area that is very top of mind for MFA. We represent alternative asset management globally, so that's hedge funds, private credit, a lot of really innovative strategies that are allowing institutional investors to achieve their investment objectives. We see this is such an incredible moment to establish our own boots-on-the-ground permanent presence here in London and throughout the UK, because I do see this as a land of opportunity. I think our members see the UK as a global hub of asset management activity. That has long been the case. I think there appears to be kind of a renewed commitment to ensuring that that message is heard loud and clear. And we've had a very constructive and promising relationship working with the FCA and other policymakers that really sends the message, I think, that you all want to have an innovative, growth-oriented, competitive economy, and our members certainly are excited to be a part of that.
Great. That's a good scene setter. But Tom, how do you see this opportunity? I mean, is it an opportunity for wise investors as well as financial criminals?
Well, I think I've been in the think tank world for too long, because when I see a question like the land of opportunity, I precisely think for whom? And as someone who gets rung by journalists on pretty much a near daily basis from outside the UK to say, is Londongrad still alive? I think we have to definitely consider the opportunity for criminality. I mean, the UK obviously is a global financial centre, and it has for a long time appeared as part of the problem rather than part of the solution. Now, to be fair, and as a result of the terrible tragedy in Ukraine, the government has started to make up some of the lost ground. And so for the financial criminals, we would hope that in the medium term, it's less of a land of opportunity than it was. I will leave the industry and the supervisor to perhaps talk about some of the other issues, but I guess I would just point to some of the things that we track, which is the way in which things like the crypto industry are developing, the way in which electronic money institutions are developing, all of which present opportunity for both sides of the tracks, and that's perhaps something we might talk about later.
So Tom obviously brings up the reputation of the UK. We've heard a lot about Singapore on Thames. Tom mentions London grad. As a regulator, the token regulator in the room, I mean, how does that trouble you, that reputation is still there? And what do you think the new mindset about a land of opportunity, do you think that is going to help or make it worse?
I think financial services in the UK is still incredibly strong. So, the UK wholesale markets, for example, remains the second largest global hub in the world. We have a unique position as that full service global wholesale market piece. And we're number one for international debt issuance. So yes, I guess we are going to attract some crime, and we do work to get that crime out. The thing for me, I mean, there are lots of things that have happened in the last 18 months. It has struggled a little bit in the last 18 months, as no doubt you'll be able to talk about. And we are working on things like the Edinburgh reforms, things like the depth of market with the Mansion House Compact will help to play for that. But fundamentally, about innovation and embracing that innovation, but thinking about it ethically, thinking about the policies we need to consider with, I'm going to say artificial intelligence, but perhaps more recently, crypto. So crypto, where we have registered 44 firms to date.
Since we didn't get to speak about crypto with Andrew Griffith, maybe we will go there next. So Tom, how would you describe the current regulatory approach, and do you think it's fit for purpose? I mean, there isn't really one, is there, at the moment?
No, and I mean, I guess the first thing I would say is that if we were having this conversation 4 years ago, then actually there was no thought going on, not just in the UK, but really anywhere on crypto regulation. And just to be a geek briefly, that issue was grasped by the Financial Action Task Force, the global standard setter for anti-money laundering and the rest of it. And actually, it's impressive how fast that organization has moved. The question now is, of course, how is that then going to be implemented in different countries? And immediately we see different attitudes. So I spent the last, earlier this week I was in Latvia, and I was listening to an official from Estonia talking on the record about how they'd had so many crypto firms operating in Estonia. It had become a real problem for them, and they introduced this new law last year, and I think they closed down sort of 400 crypto operators in the first few weeks. So the point is that I think different countries are at different stages, and that therein I think lies a bit of a risk, because of course crypto is cross-border, and if we're not careful, we find ourselves exposed to the risks of that here in the UK, even though at the moment I would argue that actually UK is being relatively cautious, despite perhaps what the Treasury wants.
I mean, be careful what you wish for is the story from Estonia. Yeah. So what would you say to the Estonian approach? How are you looking at that and learning from it?
I think Tom's right. I mean, you need to eventually think about this in a global way, because crypto works globally. We did take perhaps a prudent approach to begin with crypto, and there was a little bit of pressure, to be fair, at the registration stage. For that, the rules that we used were exactly that, anti-money laundering rules. Now, things have progressed. We are looking at financial promotions rules as well, and we are very focused on firms that are operating without permissions to promote or incorrectly promoting crypto as something that it isn't. Treasury are working very hard and thinking about what the future of crypto will be, and we are aligned with them, working alongside them.
Tom, you wanted to get in?
Well, I just obviously quite a prominent article in another publication recently from Charles Randall, kind of querying the approach that the UK is taking to crypto regulation, and I guess my sense is that perhaps alignment between Stratford and Whitehall is not perfect. I'm asking the questions now, sorry.
Stop, Roz.
I mean, it's a good question.
I mean, so I did read Charles Randall's point. I mean, he is independent now, so he is not associated with the FCA. Anything before it's done, there's always going to be a conversation, but we're absolutely talking, we're working things through, and that's part of a normal negotiation process or exploration process.
But It does seem like the UK is definitely looking to be, at least a little bit more slow in terms of administering crypto rules, and maybe not. And I mean, it does look like they're pulling away from what the EU has done and what the US is doing. They do seem to want to embrace that industry. Is that fair, do you think?
So if I just look at fintech, so if I broaden it out from crypto and look at fintech, fintech in the UK is 3 times that of France and Germany as a point. We're second only to California. We do have actually quite a thriving, innovative industry here. So I don't think it's right to say that we are, holding back or overly cautious. I think one of the things that the UK is admired for is the strength of its regulation. And it comes about through partnership with industry as well as with government and parliament.
Let's look at the point of view of the practitioners. I mean, is crypto something your industry is looking at? I mean, hedge funds obviously are in this space, but do they care about the regulatory arbitrage that is now available?
It's a good question. Hedge funds love innovation, of course, and certainly are following along as the industry matures. I would say, broadly speaking, our members would like regulatory clarity. And there is generally somewhat of a reluctance to engage in activity and not really know ultimately where different key jurisdictions land on how it will be considered and regulated. So there's interest and there is some activity. I think we would expect to see potentially more activity when the rules of the road in the key jurisdictions are clearer.
So I guess the absence of clear regulation is the problem. Tom, do you think, based on your, expertise in the area, do you think that's going to be incoming anytime soon?
Well, again, sorry to be boring about the Financial Action Task Force, but it has set an expectation. And if you don't know what the FATF is, it's a thing that means you have to give all that documentation when you go and try and open a bank account or send money to your granny. But it has set a very strong expectation. It will begin to evaluate countries in its latest round from, I think, 2025. So kind of the need for regulation and the need for meeting global standards is coming down the track quite fast. Now, FATF is a minimum standard. It's not a ceiling. And so therefore, there is inevitably going to be some difference, some arbitrage. But the need for regulation will be there. And I think once we've got regulation, then you can go to town with your hedge funds or whatever it is to figure out how to make money out of the differences that will unnecessarily be there.
So, but where we are now, is there a risk that the UK falls onto the grey list because of a lack of regulation on crypto, or what's?
Far be it from me to suggest where the UK should be. But I mean, it's certainly the case. I think if you're a leading global financial services centre, then you better have the regulation in place to deal with the responsibilities that come with that. And I don't think we can be selective about what sort of financial instruments and other investment opportunities pass through London. It's difficult enough to control. So we need to have very high standards, because otherwise, to your point, there's plenty of plain sight to hide in because there's so much financial activity in the UK.
Right. Shifting gears a little bit, I think this demonstrates one of the issues the UK has in trying to become the land of opportunity. Ultimately, it's an international, global regulatory system that now applies to almost everywhere. Emily, do you think that limits the scope for opportunity?
No, I don't really think it's a limiter. If I pull out one example, the Smarter Regulatory Framework, which is the mechanism by which we're looking at all the rules and we can make them appropriate for the UK market, together with our directive for the secondary competitive directive. So thinking of all those things together, they all need to be balanced with the fact that it's not just the money that moves globally, but the firms are predominantly global as well. So we need to consider regulatory burden with it. If we're too different from everybody else, then the cost of doing business here becomes excessive. So that is a balance that we do need to strike constantly.
If I could maybe jump in on the balance point, Emily, that you're making. Having a strong regulatory structure is what will invite activity to the UK. And it's important that there are rules and policies that protect investors that will instill confidence in the markets and will thus create, as a flywheel, more activity. I think where the UK, where you all seem to be really doing it particularly well right now relative to some other jurisdictions, is maintaining strong rules, but engaging in a conversation about how they should be recalibrated, and certainly not just inheriting without review rules that have served a broader EU and may not be fit for purpose for the UK investors and markets. And I think that is, when we think of the opportunity, it's certainly not to undermine regulation, but the opportunity to really tinker with it to kind of optimize and invite more capital flow here into the UK.
Yeah, exactly.
Tom.
Can I just give a counterpoint to that, which is that I spent 20 years growing up in the capital markets in London, and the number of times people would talk about, the history of the Eurobond market, and the Eurobond market is what it is because of regulatory changes that were made in the United States when the Sarbanes-Oxley was brought in. We all sat there going, this is boom time for us in London because that's going to create impediments in the United States, which was obviously the main competitor financial market. So whilst I would like to believe that people go for the beacon of regulation and we want all of that, and you want rule of law and you want to know contracts can be enforced and stuff, I'm not necessarily convinced that there isn't an element of, if you like, regulation shopping in the financial services industry, and therefore we might want to have a more attractive shop front, and I'm not necessarily sure that an attractive shop front is a tougher shop front.
Well, on that point though, back in the Eurobond heyday, we didn't really have that international approach though, right?
True.
So now we do have these, global institutions, whether it's Basel or whether it's the, FATF, a good example of one. Does that change? Does that change things?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a valid point to make, but it only changes. I think it only changes things if we then take in the enforcement action in a way that means that bad actors are squeezed out of the system, and I think that's an area which we need to bear in mind. Do we have, certainly in the United States, if you get things wrong in the United States, you can pretty much guarantee to be marched off the trading floor. I'm not convinced that necessarily we have the same enforcement appetite or the same enforcement track record in the UK.
Speaking of enforcement, I mean, do you have enough resources at the FCA at the moment to achieve, that sort of standard of regulation?
So I guess there's a question. Well, what is enough? We do have quite an active enforcement program, a list of things that we're doing. And I think, you can read in the press, there's a regular flow of enforcement actions that we are taking. But again, as you said, is there regulatory arbitrage? Is there not regulatory arbitrage? I've only been a regulator for 2.5 years, and before that I also was in industry, so I can speak sort of from both sides of the fence. One of the things that we're doing, I think, in the world of wholesale markets, particularly like consolidated tape, as an example, it's about making that, whether it's a shop front, whether it's regulation, whether it's the conditions to attract more money in, we are working, again, with industry to find the things that will help. It's not all about regulation. It never has been all about regulation.
You mentioned consolidated tape. So you've run a consultation on that recently. So when can we, what's
when are the results?
Yeah, when are the results? And when can we expect, the next steps to take place?
So the consolidated tape, we had a consultation paper. So the process is, we do a consultation paper. We ask anybody and everybody to give their feedback into us. At any point, you can look at the FCA website and see all the consultation papers are out there. They've all got dates where you have to have your responses by. After we've got all that feedback back in, we will work on the responses that we had to alter our policies, and then the final policy statement comes out. That policy statement will come out in December.
Good to know.
So on the consolidated tape, I don't want to miss the opportunity to say MFA has a keen interest in the work of the FCA on this front and is very supportive of you moving forward with a consolidated tape for fixed income. We're also very encouraged by the idea that maybe next year you would look to broaden that out to the equities piece as well. And we do think that's such an important piece of transparency and not in any way deregulatory, but really, again, making investors more confident in the markets here, making them more user-friendly.
Yes.
For those who maybe aren't so familiar with the lexicon and what the consultation on consolidated tape, I mean, it's a tongue twister, isn't it? Could you just explain why it's so important for your industry?
Sure. Yeah. The United States does have something very similar, and the EU is moving in that direction as well. And pleased that the UK is, and it really just serves as a trade data repository so that information is available to the investing public about what the activity is, how liquid certain securities are, and gives a better line of sight into who's doing what sort of transacting and how that might impact the markets.
And would you say it encourages sort of new players in terms of market structure and liquidity providers to emerge, right?
Yes, and what we've seen in the US context, which has been in place for quite a while now, but when it first went into place, it pretty significantly grew market activity. And I'm sure you guys have taken a look at that and for many of the same reasons are pursuing it here.
Sorry, go on.
I'll say absolutely. So we are about to go out with 2 more consultations, one on bonds and another one on derivatives as well. So watch out for those. And yes, as I said, regulation's only ever part of the story.
So, Gillian, perhaps we might talk a little bit about what sort of successes, from your point of view, we've already had in the UK regulatory space. Let's talk about short selling. So we've had, that's probably been the biggest sort of move so far in terms of dropping the disclosure requirements. How has that been received?
Well, a huge development and a really strong message I think that the UK is sending around the world about its commitment to getting regulation right, preserving it and getting it right. And it does modify disclosure. We think it enhances pretty substantively disclosure in a way that is more useful for investors. So what basically is in the process of taking place is what would have been individual manager level position disclosure to the public. So a short seller or any investor takes a short position at a certain threshold that is told to the public. There, of course, is IP in doing so. There are great incentives to not short at that threshold so that you are not releasing all that information to the public. And the UK has taken a look at this and looked at the data that shows that the current individual manager position reporting actually causes a lot of herding behavior. It actually increases volatility, and it really harms price discovery because, again, there's an artificial exercise of the position that otherwise might be higher if you're really just looking at the fundamentals because of this disclosure threshold. So it is being replaced with aggregated disclosure. As an investor, do I want to know before investing in a security how much it's being shorted? Absolutely. I think that's decision useful as an investor, but it doesn't really matter if it's this manager doing this amount or this one doing this. It's the holistic picture. So providing that to the investing public is a really, I think, strong step, and it will encourage more activity because even investors that aren't necessarily hedge funds have the need to short in order to hedge other long investments. And when they can more comfortably do that here, they will be taking more of those long investments as well.
Yeah.
And any views on how that has come to pass? Was it a smooth process getting it underway, like the new regime? From an FCA point of view, like in terms of,
I think one of the things that the FCA internally, what we're working on quite hard is the speed at which we can get new regulation out. Part of that smarter regulatory framework is looking at 30 files, big leverage files, that's how they were described, of rules, and that's a big task. So getting through those files, making the tweaks and making them the right things to change does include a massive partnership, as I said. So I think, as Julian explained, part of that is working with industry, part of it is working with government and with Treasury as well. Treasury have things to do here too.
I sense we might be losing the room a little bit, so I thought maybe we'd take some questions.
Lost me as well.
Sorry? Yeah? Well, that's bad. Okay. We do have one question, but it's somewhat controversial. I'm not sure if it's really relevant either, but it says here, maybe Tom, you could take this. The panel refers to bad actors Aren't the central banks the baddest of the bad?
Wow.
I mean, I don't
Uber market manipulators. Well, I guess the central banks have had some tough jobs to do in recent years. I guess there is no doubt, and you were kind of slightly raising the question earlier as well. You know, there is no doubt that for a period of time, and I go back to when I was working at JP Morgan and we had QE and all of that. I mean, you know, we thought the central bankers were the best actors possible because they were really helping us make money. I'm not sure that's necessarily my view as a banker at JP Morgan at the time would reflect more broadly held views, but they have been more interventionist, I suppose. And I guess I'd ask the question to industry now. You know, how do you react to that? Can you plan? Are they a bad actor for industry? Because they certainly weren't a bad actor for industry when I was working in it.
Right. I mean, what's interesting also, I think, is what qualifies as market manipulation these days anyway. I mean, because, not in the UK, but in Poland recently, there was a big spat about whether the government was manipulating energy prices ahead of the election. And, this made front page news, but realistically, the government is kind of free to do that. Gillian, do you have any view on, can you even regulate you couldn't you? How do you regulate the central bank on its that's nefarious
job description,
manipulative actions in the market?
I think, it's a great question because it's obviously slightly controversial. But when we think of bad actors, we are thinking, aren't we, of people who work slightly more surreptitiously and are there for their own personal gain. A central bank is, if nothing else, transparent.
You were talking earlier on, I think, or someone was talking earlier on about the politicization of everything and politicization of finance. So the example you just gave there, again, why do people suspect that the Polish government will be doing that? It's because we actually don't trust politicians or people in positions of leadership anymore to, if you like, leave alone things that historically we'd have thought you wouldn't have messed with unless it was in the interest of the population at large, and you wouldn't have messed with it in order to get re-elected. That's me being very naive. But it does play to that politicization of everything that you were talking about earlier.
Not that we prepped this, but I am going to throw in a question about the intervention power that was scrapped earlier I think it was earlier this year or maybe last year. There was a proposition for the government to have more intervention power with the Bank of England and with the FCA. Do you worry that might come back as a proposition? Are markets in such a state that maybe, it could be back on the table? We saw earlier this year, the public was very upset with mortgage rates, being reset much higher. They wanted the government to intervene, but obviously they can't because that's the domain of the Bank of England.
I think there is strength in the Bank of England being independent, but that's my own personal view. Am I concerned, or do I think that interventional powers will come back? If it comes to a crisis, the government can step in, Treasury can step in now. There are a certain number of intervention rules that already exist. I think the reason why it was discussed, and it's right for things to be discussed, but one of the reasons why it's taken off the table was that strength of independence and what that gives. So possibly more for Bank of England PRA than FCA, I would suggest, but I'd be interested in others' views.
Any views on independence?
Yeah, maybe just to build on both of the broader question around central banks and the independence as well. The decisions made by central banks, I'm not here to share a view on whether they're the right or the wrong decisions. I know they're lofty and weighty, but they do impact market dynamics. And when rates rise, it can impact government funding needs and sovereign debt issues. And I think it's just another example of why it's so important for a diversity of participation in these key markets, especially because of the potential for there to be volatility, sometimes maybe driven by central bank activity. The independence, I would say, is very much respected, and monetary policy is not something that should be politicized.
Maybe relevant, maybe not relevant, but we see right now there's a bit of a kind of race to issue stable coins and also CBDCs within that context. I think there's an arms race between, say, some major jurisdictions, the EU especially. The UK is in the midst of some, I think the HMT and Bank of England are working together on a stablecoin proposition. Do you think, therefore, that is going to be an opportunity for the UK to be a first mover? We saw this week with stablecoin legislation especially, they want to embrace stablecoins by giving them access to the Bank of England. Tom, any views on whether this is good or bad?
Well, you and I have been round this boy a few times. So I'll go back to something I said earlier on, which is that if the UK is going to remain a global leader in financial services, then it needs to have the capacity and the capability to react to these innovations. It doesn't mean it needs to go full bore into being the first to issue a CBDC or promoting this, that, or the other stablecoin. But the bottom line is it needs to be in a position to react and have the necessary legislation and everything else in place. I think what I am interested in when it comes to this area is the use case. What is it we are trying to solve for if we were to start introducing this kind of, whether it's a CBDC or encouraging the development of stable coins. And I remain, as you know, I remain a kind of a skeptic on the use case at the moment. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be ready to deal with that use case should it arise.
But do you think it will be, do you think the UK has to move, especially on CBDCs? Like, if everyone else issues CBDCs, will we be left behind if we don't do it, even if we don't think it's a good thing to do?
Well, so I think specifically on CBDCs, I think there are...
Which are central bank digital currencies, yeah. For those who don't know.
The world's worst acronym. But anyway, I think there are a number of reasons why I think the UK needs to be kind of, I'm going to sound like a politician now, but like in the forefront or world leading in this topic. And part of that, I think, is defensive. It's because, as I said before, we better have the capabilities in the UK to, I don't know, issue bonds that are CBDC linked or whatever it is, right? We need to have that platform. But secondly, dare I say it, we're not exactly the world's biggest currency, and so I think we need to make sure that we are able to react to what others are doing. So there's a defensive element to it there as well. So we're doing a big study on this at RUSI, and we did really interesting interviews in Sweden, and consistently people said one of the reasons why we've gone so far down the CBDC route in Sweden is because we're a very small currency next to a very big currency, the potential digital euro, and we'd better be ready to understand what the consequences of that are. So I think the UK should be focusing on this, but not necessarily because it wants to be the first to issue or it wants to be the kind of the world leader. It just needs to be ready.
So we've got about 5 minutes left. I'd love some more questions from the audience, so do feel free to submit via the Swap Card app. But I think this is a good moment to pivot into tokenization and also sort of efficiency in terms of regulation, because Andrew Griffith kind of hinted that this is one of the great opportunities that we have. Do you think that digitization, tokenization, all that sort of stuff, is that where we can really differentiate ourselves?
I wouldn't be personally as specific as digitization. So are you talking about instruments, or are you talking about the way that we do things?
Well, everything from soup tech, as they call it, supervisory tech, reg tech, fintech, all these mechanisms to essentially allow companies to operate more efficiently within the remit of a compliant operation. Okay.
Yeah, understood. So, you're right. So this talks really to firm burden again. So how easy is it to work with the regulator, about how you sending in your data information pieces, how quickly can you get information back out, how quickly can you get determinations of decisions made. So in the last 2 years, there's been quite a lot of focus in my area. So one of the reasons why I joined the FCA, around authorizations. So authorizations were taking an inordinate amount of time. And we have worked through a three-pronged strategy. First of all, get things moving quickly with people. Secondly, look at the process, look at risk appetite. And thirdly, move to, a digitized approach to authorization. We're now in that third stage. And so we're moving away from application forms in their old way to a digitized form that people fill in. It gets sent through once we know that all the information is there. We augment it with information we have on our side. And the speed that that can create is phenomenal. So we've done that with senior management regime forms, a thing called Form A, which is a good place to start. So we've done that with one form. We are going to do it over more forms. But basically, if you look at the senior management regime and the SMCR stats, they have moved to the lower quartile is around 27 days. That's how quickly we now get a determination made, and it had been 6 months. So it is much, much faster, partly through digitization, but partly because it's a focus for us to be more efficient. It is one of my focuses to be more efficient as COO. So more generally, I think the FCA has spoken quite a lot about the way that we're going to use data, about making sure that we only ask for data that we are going to use, that we're able to give back and give insights back to industry. And we're working on that alongside the PRA, so we're working on the same way of getting information in. And then from a sort of step back and look inside, a little bit to Tom's point, I'd be very happy to know that we can look at all of that data and do data analytics across that data to find the spurious bad actors. So we can actually pinpoint and be quite proactive on things that we think are outside of tolerance.
How concerned are your members about sort of efficiency of, all of this stuff, like regulation, authorization?
The ability to streamline and to speed up and to kind of create more predictability in how these things work, I think is certainly welcomed by our industry. We haven't really taken a view and waded in too deeply on exactly what that should look like and further digitizing the process, but certainly supportive of the initiative.
So I'm going to give Tom the last word. We've got 1 minute left. Is there a fundamental paradox here, though? If you make things more efficient, do you also make it more efficient for the criminals to get in again? I mean, is there a trade-off?
Of course, there is a trade-off. I think where we have to be, so there's a tension. There's a tension between wanting to be an innovative, world-leading, pick your overused superlative financial center, and the kind of the regulation and the sort of is a bit of a drag. And you see that in some of the fintechs that operate in the UK. I mean, they're kind of well-known brands, but they don't necessarily meet the standards that they probably should do. And I would just say that we hosted the Deputy Secretary of the US Treasury at RUSI recently, and he made this point very clearly, which is that I'm all for innovation, but you better have the governance in there from the very start, because if you let innovation get ahead of governance, then you're going to have a problem. So I think that's something we're going to have to bear in mind. But it feels as though in the UK there is a healthy tension between those, and we sit between the FCA and Treasury, and we watch the fistfights in the street, and that's healthy.
Thank you for that, Tom. I'm afraid we're out of time, but that has been a fascinating discussion again. I don't know, maybe quick straw poll from the audience. Is the UK a land of opportunity? Hands up if you think yes. Ah.
Oh dear.
And no, just to make sure, 'cause sometimes people are hesitant. There's no.
Wow.
There, that's good. There's a lot of undecideds.
Go forth
Okay.
and opportunitate.
Yeah, there you go. I think that tells us everything. Well, thank you very much. The next panel is going to be here. I'm staying on, so everyone stay in the room, and I will invite you all to leave this way. Thank you. Okay, I'm waiting, I'm hesitating just because I'm hoping people went for a quick coffee and they're going to come back, but maybe not. But that doesn't matter. They're just the ones that are missing out. Like, we'll give them FOMO, don't worry. So again, I'm Isabella Kaminska, and nothing's changed there. Even in the quantum realm, I'm still here, just about. We are going to be discussing a super interesting topic right now. Quantum is coming, and it's coming to financial services. And I'm really delighted to have an expert panel with me here. Immediately to my left is Philip Intalura, Global Head of Quantum Technologies at HSBC, and he's going to give us the perspective of a practitioner, I think, in the field. And then on the far left is David Williams, who is Chairman, Chief Executive Officer, and founder of Arkit, which is a fascinating company that we're going to learn about a little bit more. But David is also a very well-known character in the city anyway, so thank you for joining us. I thought we would just start off, especially since we have lost a little bit of the room, with something a bit exciting. So quantum, what does it mean? Like, why would anyone in financial services care about this at all? I mean, it's the stuff of sci-fi, I would argue. David, why don't you give us an opener into why financial services companies should care about the coming quantum age?
Well, I think there are two sides of the coin. It seems
There are in quantum always. Schrodinger's cat, right? Sorry, go on.
got there before me. I think there's threat and opportunity. The opportunity is pretty straightforward. When I started Arkit, I remember Mark Wolpert, the chief scientific officer, saying that a universal quantum computer was 40 years away. That was in 2017. I think he was telling me off at a panel after I'd said it was going to be 2027. And you now have people like the almighty Ernst & Young saying it might be 2027. That's not an indication of how right I was. It's merely an indication that when the prize for the development of a new technology is all of the power in the world, all of the brains and all of the money gravitates to that field. And that's what's happened in the last 10 years. So quantum computing development has sped up, and it's beyond reasonable doubt now that there are functioning quantum computers that are doing useful tasks today. And within about 3 or 4 years, there will be a very widespread array of quantum computers doing a lot of useful tasks. And one of those useful tasks will be portfolio optimization. Anything that involves looking at very large data sets and making guesses about what the right outcome is going to be will find itself targeted by quantum computing. And so the financial services industry spends most of its time looking at very large data sets and trying to guess what the right outcome is going to be. And that's what quantum computers do. So the banks that are earliest to develop that usable applications for that technology will probably find themselves with advantages. And so that is happening today. On the flip side, and I'll probably spend more time later talking about this, it's beyond reasonable doubt that everyone's encryption is already badly compromised. There are a dozen threats to your certification system already that make you vulnerable, but quantum computers will destroy all legacy encryption. There's no great surprise there. It's just a question of when. And banks face a systemic risk as a result of that. They face that risk not just on the day that a quantum computer can break everyone's keys quickly, but on the day that one quantum computer breaks one encryption key, and that's announced, then we enter the era of quantum systemic threat to the banking industry. And those two things are small single-digit years away.
So no biggie. We're about a week since Rishi Sunak held some sort of conference at Bletchley Park, I believe. I'm just joking. Of course, everyone knows it was the AI Summit, which was the home of Enigma, which started this whole thing going, right? So what was interesting with Enigma, for those who don't know, go and read about it, because it was actually cracked by the Polish, but that's a different story. The point is that when they created the computer and they had the technology, they couldn't necessarily deploy it because that would give the game away. Is a similar situation happening with quantum? If someone has a quantum computer, especially in financial services, would you even know about it? And so is this 2027 prediction actually a bluff? Like, could there be one out there already?
Is this a question to me?
Yes, or David, I mean...
So I think the first thing I would say is banks are very unlikely to have a quantum computer. Most of the work that we see is happening in partnership with technology providers, and there's a few reasons for that. There's specific expertise to kind of run these things, but they require very specific environments, right? So some of the superconducting machines, ion traps, they need very, very heavy cryogenic cooling to almost absolute zero. So to maintain that, it's a big thing.
Just to be clear, I didn't think the bank had it.
Okay, good.
I thought it was more like a state actor who might be...
Yes, so I was going to come on to that. So yes, so there's much more likelihood that state actors will have quantum machines, and David will talk more about this from the cyber perspective, because, of course, one of the things that a very powerful quantum computer to do is going to be able to break cryptography. And so there's that kind of national interest, and that's why there's this kind of race to the top. And there's no surprise, therefore, that many national governments are rolling out these investments and plans across national quantum strategies, because the stakes are very high, as David outlined. I think we do have to be very cautious about how we start thinking about building cyber resilience and preparing to build cyber resilience from quantum attacks, wherever that, whenever that may be. And there's different views on those time horizons. But I also agree it's a matter of when rather than if. And on the other side, there is this kind of commercial upside as well. And so there's a lot of interest for financial services and HSBC, for example, because a lot of the value at stake from a commercial opportunity is attributed to financial services, because the types of problems we solve every day are very close to the types of problems that quantum computers can speed up. So optimization is definitely one, but there's other things like transactional fraud detection, which is through machine learning and training machine learning models more effectively with quantum. And it's also financial simulation, like Monte Carlo models, climate risk, stress testing. So a lot of the things we're doing kind of will give us that edge, and that's why we're kind of looking at this early, investing in it early.
And I mean, David, maybe give you a little bit of insight in terms of the journey you've had to where you are with Arcit. So, and in terms of how you are, selling your services. I'm not to give him a total free PR job, but it is an interesting story because you've had a pivot. To be fair,
I'll try not to do the PR bit, but part of the journey answers the previous question that Phil answered. I went to China in 2018. And I met with the head of the Chinese quantum program through a friendship I had in Vienna. And I learned then that China was investing $10 billion in their quantum research program. And when I came back to London and told a few of my friends in Westminster, they all laughed. And then it became known about a year later that that's exactly what had happened. The shutters came down in China about 2 years ago. Postdoctoral researchers around the world tend to talk to each other. The guys that did postdoc in quantum and went back to China 10 years ago no longer talk to their colleagues in the West.
They went dark.
They went dark. The shutters came down about 2 years ago.
Interesting.
We are highly, highly certain that China is at least 2 years ahead of the West in quantum research, because they've just started earlier and spent more money. And that was one of the reasons why I started Arcit. I'd spent the previous time doing telecoms, and I'd seen how easy it is for governments to break your encryption. So, for example, it's not very difficult to compromise a root certificate and break into your system. It's not terribly difficult. It's been done a lot. We've been showing customers recently a thing called a TLS sniffing attack. And if anyone wants a demonstration of that, I'd be pleased to do it, where we can show how easy it is to go and find where your data is and steal it online. You don't need to break into infrastructure. You don't need to break any laws. The headers that are in things like your SharePoint traffic allow me to find the pipe that emits your data into the internet, sniff it out, and then go and steal it, and then pop that onto a hard drive. And then in a couple of years' time, when my quantum computer is big enough, I'll set it on the task of breaking into that data and finding out what's in it. So we knew 2017 that there were problems like that coming, and so I and a bunch of colleagues invented a technique using quantum physics that could create encryption keys that can't be broken. There are two types of encryption. Encryption where you and I do a maths problem between us, and that makes a key. And a quantum computer will reverse engineer the math and break the key. There's a second type of encryption called symmetric, where you and I have an identical copy of a random number, and we use that to encrypt. And a quantum computer won't be able to break that random number. In fact, we calculate 14 billion years is how long it would take.
For the benefit of the audience, for those who are not quantum literate, what I love about the symmetric thing, it's the football thing, isn't it? It's the nuclear codes are kept on a symmetric basis, right? Because
Exactly. So all of our military infrastructure, all of our data centers, if you've got any friends in the military who are ranked sort of major or above, they tend to carry a little dongle around with them that has these symmetric keys on them. And historically, it's only been possible to make these symmetric encryption keys by human courier. With quantum key distribution, which is something that Phil knows more than most about, you can beam these keys around in lasers in a way that you can't, they can't be intercepted, and we started doing that. There's a big place in the world for that technology, for ultra-secure stuff. We stumbled accidentally across a way of capturing most of the benefits of quantum distribution in a new kind of software. And a few years ago, I announced we've invented software that makes encryption keys that can never be broken and never be stolen until the end of time. It seemed at that point that the world had a meeting and decided to say that we were definitely lying. And so there was a lot of skepticism for a while. But we announced that we published a paper a couple of weeks ago that declared that our software is compliant with NSA guidelines on cybersecurity, which is a big nod and a wink as to what's coming.
is it not a nod and a wink that they can penetrate it?
No.
Joking.
It's a nod and a wink that says we know with 100% certainty that our software encryption keys can never be broken and never be stolen until the end of time. And so the skepticism in the world has rather gone away, and people like Fortinet and Juniper and Dell have started to integrate my software. So we've had this journey from looking at hardware and then moving to software, and we're now finding that there's a cohort of organizations that have long life data. If you have data which matters for a lot of years, then you need to protect it. So if you are injecting data into the internet about a medical patient's DNA or about a bank's financial history, we want that data to be safe for our whole lives. If you're injecting data into the internet about the design of the latest Tempest fighter jet or about the design of a new nuclear power station, we really need that data to be secure for decades. And so the world needs encryption that will keep that data secure for a long time. And that's where we find ourselves now. We've got companies buying our software to protect long life data. And so I think there is going to be a multiplicity of different techniques of doing this. Some of them will be hardware, like QKD. Some will be software. And there will be a bit of a tussle over the next few years for what the winning variants are. But I think what's really important is that policymakers have to keep a very open mind about technology here. It's very dangerous when people in government think that they should decide the future of technology. The idea that any prime minister or any cabinet minister or any civil servant has ever been able to accurately forecast the direction of technology is really quite silly. So policymakers need to keep a very open mind about what will win. Now, of course, that doesn't mean everyone must buy ARKit's product. They should really. But what I'm saying is everyone needs to keep a very open mind about all of ARKit's competitors. Some other people will invent some good technology that will be useful. And governments need to be not dictatorial on that subject.
Philip, as a potential consumer of quantum, secure technology, I mean, for me, maybe I'm naive. It all comes down to trust, doesn't it? Like, are we equipped enough to be able to, figure out which of these services are doing what they say they do and which ones are not?
Trust is an important factor, but that's kind of why you need to start testing and exploring the different technologies. So within HSBC, we now have, as of roughly April last year, we formalised a quantum programme, and we have brought in a small team of specialists. I'm a quantum physicist by training myself, with that very intention, right, to explore where within the bank that these technologies are going to have the most impact, both from a commercial compute perspective, but also from a cyber defense perspective. Things like David had mentioned, like the longevity of data. What is more, most of our data is super secure, but there's some hyper secure. And so trust, customers also trust us to protect their data as well. So trust is a very important factor. So as part of the work we do
Roger Farage might be interested.
Yes.
Sorry. That
Yes. Quite right.
Turn him down, it's okay.
So part of this preparation for readiness is exploring what the use cases are and what the technologies are going to be best fit for those use cases. And as well as on the defense side, where there's lots of different solutions and vendors coming out, on the compute side, the big tech companies all have quantum computers, Google, IBM, Microsoft have the capability, there's lots of startups. And so we don't know which one is going to get there first, which one's going to give you the most reliable kind of outputs. So we're testing lots of them. And so within HSBC, we have this philosophy of kind of being part of this huge ecosystem where we work with many, many different partners. We test many different technologies. We speak to people like David and others to understand their philosophies and how they've designed. And then we, for some, we'll then test them and we'll put them into, practice in terms of real life use cases in test environments. And that's all part of this process of learning and figuring out, what are we going to apply where with which technology at the right time, right? So this is why we think a quantum research program is very important for an organization like us, right now, is because that process takes time and engineering to figure out. It's not something you can do quickly and easily. And so that's kind of why we are doing what we're doing.
How big a deal is the whole Harvest Now, decrypt later thing for banking, especially?
So I think Harvest Now, Decrypt Later is definitely one of the elements we talk about in terms of potential threats, and that that specific threat which is applicable to data now, and it's just a matter of time before that can be decrypted. And for me, it kind of logically makes sense as well, because the primary target is going to be government agencies, and I think the second target is going to be financial services. Financial services does experience attacks. The attacks get more sophisticated. The frequency of attacks get higher, and so absolutely we need to always be looking at modernizing cryptography and being ahead of the curve. So I think Store Now, Decrypt Later is a particular threat, but I think actually for us even more motivating than Store Now, Decrypt Later is the time it's going to take to transform cybersecurity from what we have today to something which is quantum safe or post-quantum secure. Because you think about the number of applications, where those applications are interfacing, the geographies we operate in, this is a decade plus of activity to transform cybersecurity. So I think both of those factors are reasons to, the Store Now, Decrypt Later and the time it's going to take to transfer your cybersecurity. And it will be some combination of physical and mathematical, and there needs to be cyber agility in there. You need to figure out your inventory and all this kind of stuff. That's going to be a long process, a costly process as well. And so those are, two strong reasons I think that organizations should be thinking about this transition.
What Phil's just said mirrors what the White House said last year. So May last year, the White House put out National Security Memorandum number 10, in which it said that the world's efforts to upgrade legacy encryption, these mathematical encryption techniques, post-quantum algorithms they're called, are not mature. And they're not going to be mature for a long time. And so the White House directed national security systems to immediately move to symmetric cryptography. Now, symmetric cryptography means one of three things: the human courier with a dongle, a QKD system, or the software that ARKit's invented. That's the only three ways of delivering symmetric key cryptography. And that's a very clear message to the world that you haven't got long, and some of the alternatives that the world's been working on are not going to be ready in time. The store now decrypt later attack, as Phil said, is more present than most people in this room will understand. So when I explained earlier I can do a TLS sniffing attack and I can steal your data, that doesn't just mean that you're at risk whenever the quantum computer is big enough to decrypt it. We think it's a GDPR risk. So all banks have an obligation to take reasonable measures to protect their clients' data. And if you delve into what GDPR laws actually say, banks are obligated to use customary cybersecurity best practices to protect data. We'd argue that if you know that your data is being sniffed and stolen in the internet, and if you know that a quantum computer is likely to be able to decrypt that within a matter of a single-digit number of years, there comes a point where your GDPR officer is starting to think, hold on, am I really using best practices? So I think you're going to see a large number of organizations in the next 12 to 18 months draw the conclusion that their own GDPR compliance is prejudiced by that particular threat.
I am very fearful of my data being sniffed, that's for sure. And as a consumer, and I guess GDPR does apply to customers more so than anything, because they're the ones that are going to be doing class action suits, I guess. If that's a thing in the UK, I'm not sure. I wanted to ask more specifically though, crypto, the world of crypto, claims it's kind of quantum resilient, that all its like encryption is fine. Do you think that's right? Do you think this will be like, the quantum attack will destabilize the conventional banking system and then crypto will rise as a result?
Well, it seems, unlike esteemed journalists and public companies, cryptocurrency people have no obligation to tell the truth. No, cryptocurrencies are not quantum safe. All cryptocurrencies presently in existence use legacy encryption, which every intelligent quantum physicist and mathematician in the world agrees is compromised. No, they are not quantum safe. Those people who are lucky enough to have Genesis block bitcoins or the very early minting of some of those cryptocurrencies that might be in a bottom drawer somewhere, no, those methods of storing value are not quantum safe.
Is it actually therefore an argument against crypto because ultimately all your bitcoins will be vaporized by quantum?
Not at all. I fixed that problem. So there's a very simple way.
Are you Satoshi? No, just joking.
I may know who Satoshi is, but it's not me. There is a way of wrapping symmetric encryption keys around existing blockchains. We made an announcement quite recently about a new product that does that. It's actually quite trivial to wrap a symmetric encryption key around an existing blockchain transaction and to create wallets that use symmetric keys. So it's actually quite an easy problem to solve. And the reason that's important is not for the cryptocurrency world. It's because the technology that you and I have discussed over the years that has emerged from the cryptocurrency world has actually been adopted by mainstream banks now. There was an announcement made by the British government in September. There was a new law passed called the Electronic Trade Documents Act, which makes it legal for banks like HSBC's Trade Finance Department to use a digital asset. It's basically a type of cryptocurrency, to use a digital asset to represent trade finance transactions. Now that's a $4 trillion market. There is $4 trillion of banking trade finance transacted every year, and at present it's done on paper. And the magnificent British government has unusually led the world in passing a new law that allows a new technology to take over this market. And no one noticed. It was in, I think you reported it. Hardly anyone noticed. It wasn't on the front page of the Financial Times or the Sunday Telegraph. I think if the British government had said Bitcoin is now legal tender in Starbucks, it would have been on the front page of every newspaper. And that's a $1 trillion market. So governments are now actually allowing derivatives of cryptocurrency technology to be used in trade finance. It's legal today. We're already doing some transactions this month under that new law. And you're starting to see people talk about adopting stable coins. Unless the technology is quantum safe, it's a very unwise idea to implement new technology that might end up being used for trillions of dollars of transactions. Thankfully, there's a solution.
So inadvertently, you have secured the crypto market, although presumably quantum will finally unmask who Satoshi is, potentially.
Only if Satoshi takes his dongle out of his bottom drawer. Until that point, we won't know
Oh,
who
well,
he is.
he must have some data to be sniffed, no?
He might
Maybe.
do, yeah.
But moving.
Buy me a drink later and I'll tell you who it is.
Oh, excellent. This is newsworthy for sure. But moving back to the opportunities, because it's not just about threats. And I think from the banking perspective, we've touched upon sort of portfolio optimization and all that malarkey, but where else are the opportunities, and how, you know, operating in this world, how seriously are banks taking it at this, you know, and I don't expect you to know what your competitors are doing necessarily, but, you know, given you are a quantum scientist, you must have some understanding of how seriously the industry is taking it.
Yeah, so I think it's becoming increasingly discussed within boardrooms, and I think up until now there's been a lot of discussion about it, but there's been, you know, differences of opinion about when should we start looking at this. And I think as time goes on, more and more organisations are starting to look at it. I think there's probably right now less doing it than there are more in financial services. I think we're one of the few who are seriously looking at it. You know, it's one of our key strategic agendas within innovation and ventures, alongside things like digital currencies and decentralized identity, generative AI, all these kind of emerging technologies. There are some other banks also looking at it, although they have kind of different philosophies behind what they're doing and how they're approaching it. But you know, going back to the question, I think the combination within financial services of the commercial opportunity, which is, you know, very significant. McKinsey put this at about 1.3 trillion, right? Value to be realized by 2035 in quantum. Of that 1.3 trillion, 55% is attributed to financial services, right? Because of the closeness of the types of models to what quantum can do. That may be slightly bullish, but even if you half that number that, you know, others have, it's a big number. And so I think as more and more news is coming out about what others are doing, and most of them are at use case and testing, but the more and more that hits, I think the more and more, you know, we'll see uptake of these kind of programs being taken seriously and investment in them. So yeah, I mean, you know, again, from our perspective, we've talked about some of the use cases. There are others, like using quantum machine learning, which is an area within quantum computing for anti-money laundering, detecting fraud transactions more effectively. You know, these are big global problems all financial services have to deal with. We've done some interesting work with global trade as well in a different kind of way, looking at actually how can we differentiate pricing within our global trade business based on not just the historic risk and the geographies, but taking into account the type of product, the method of transport, the environmentally friendliness of the transaction and everything, you know, associated with that trade. And you can start building many more types of factors into these very complex combinatorial optimization problems that are laced with business policy that help you move the dial across your strategic agendas. So you can start differentiating between a brown deal and a green deal, right? And these kinds of things. So we're scratching the surface of where this technology can be applied. We're seeing incredible enhancements and breakthroughs in the technology every week. Qubits, I think, I'm trying to remember, but maybe 2016 there were 5 qubits. There's now hundreds of qubits.
What does that mean, just for the sake
So in quantum computing terms, qubits is the currency of what you do your calculations on. So you need a certain number of these qubits and a certain quality of these qubits working together to calculate your models. And so there aren't many yet, but they're kind of doubling every year. So we're seeing this exponential growth, and at the same time, we're seeing better error correction, better methods. And so the time horizons keep being compressed because these breakthroughs are happening. And as David said, over the last few years in particular, there's been the highest amount of investment in VCs and startups and all these things, which are all progressing their own modalities. So it's really a case of, it's kind of a risk-based decision, right? There is some investment required to look at this. On the scale of how much we would invest in technology, it's very, very small. And this investment may not lead to a return for some years, it may be many years, depending on how the technology progresses, but it may also be one of the best investments we ever make. And that's what this is all about. It's all about kind of figuring out when this might come and being prepared for it, because that competitive advantage will only last a certain amount of time.
So I would like to invite, we've got 7-8 minutes left. I'd like to once again call for questions from the audience via the Swapcard app. But in the interim, I thought it might be worth unpacking how quantum is going to arrive, in a commercial context, because as we have emphasized, this is like state actor sort of, costs at the moment. It's unlikely that, a regular Joe is going to get access to a quantum computer anytime soon. So how do you see it actually being distributed into the market? Is it going to be, big hedge funds first, then banks? Like, is there going to be access, time slots to computers being given out?
Apart from state actors, crime syndicates. There are several crime syndicates in the world that are bigger.
I think there was a movie about it. It was called Quantum of Solace.
So there are lots of companies that are building quantum computers, lots of early stage startup quantum computers. Yeah. And if a new company knocks on their door and says, "Hey, I've got $500 million. I'd like to buy a few of your computers," they're going to get sold. I think you'll find crime syndicates finding a way of getting hold of quantum computers once they're big enough. But yes, you will definitely find quantum compute power available in the cloud. That's why AWS and Microsoft and Google all have big programs. So you will be able to buy fractional quantum compute power in the cloud, and that will be used responsibly, as you would expect. But you'll also have state actors developing them and crime syndicates getting hold of them. And eventually, one day, even banks might have them in-house, although I think probably for a decade or more, they'll be using them in the cloud first.
So it's going to be this fractional approach. Do you think that's correct?
Well, yes. I mean, the average Joe actually all can access a quantum computer right now. Everyone can. Well, you can. Everyone in this room.
I told you you'd learn something in this
So if you want to experiment with a quantum computer and build a small circuit that demonstrates superposition or entanglement, you can do so. The cloud providers do it. IBM have Qiskit. The accounts are free. And what you get access to is not their biggest machines, but you get access to some of their smaller machines. And it's exactly that. You are put in a queue, right, to run your algorithm. And that queue will give you, it'll run the model at the time. So they are time slicing that access. And that's how we'll continue to see it.
Timeshare market, I love
yes.
it. Yeah.
And that's how it will kind of continue with, there are different modalities that have different ways of operating. There are some quantum computers that don't need the cooling that could be bought and put in-house and these kinds of things. So we don't know which ones are going to prevail in terms of the modality, and there may be multiple. But yes, give it a try. The average Joe might not be able to build a quantum circuit, but you can certainly try. And there's some interesting algorithms you can try and copy and build. So yeah, give it,
what
give
sort
it a go.
of things can you do with it? Like what is?
Well, when we talk about quantum computers, right, they are not just faster machines. They are very specific at dealing with algorithms to do certain tasks, like factoring large numbers, which is why they will be able to break cryptography when they're big enough and powerful enough. So that breaking of public key cryptography is a specific algorithm designed by someone called Peter Shor. So it's called Shor's algorithm. You can build that algorithm, if you like, right now on a quantum computer to factor not very large numbers that we use in RSA, but small numbers to work out what those constituent factors are, right? And you can build that on a circuit right now. So that's what you can do. You can break cryptography using a quantum computer at a very small scale.
Well, there you go. You were going to follow. I've got one question. I don't know if you'll be very happy with the question, though. Is investment in quantum computing not analogous to investment in FTX? As in, I think there's a suggestion here that the timeshare thing is more than just a neat, analogous sort of naming.
Well, the Chinese government's invested $10 billion into its quantum computing program. Then on top of that, you have people like Baidu and other private sector companies doing it because they think it's going to give them business advantage. Microsoft, Google, IBM have made massive investments in quantum computing because they think it's going to give them business advantage. And the history of technology is very, very straightforward. Every now and then, some clever chaps invent, it used to be men, now it's women, invent stuff that gives you a bit of business advantage. And that's all a quantum computer is. It just gives you a bit of business advantage, whether that's being faster to figure out on the battlefield what your adversary's tactics are going to be by assessing the patterns of behavior in the past and looking at their formations today. A quantum computer will analyze that data and predict what your enemy is likely to do, or whether it's taking a guess at what Izzy's going to write next Tuesday. The quantum computer will give you business advantage, and that's why companies and governments all over the world have invested in it. And it seems quite likely that the wisdom of crowds will prevail. Not every, I don't know them all, but not every quantum computing company will succeed. But quite a lot of them will, and quite a lot of them will deliver business advantage to their customers. So, no, there are very logical, pragmatic reasons why people are investing in doing this, and some of them will prevail.
I think maybe, it feels, maybe there's a disconnect because it feels so fantastical on one hand. So when you tell people you work in, quantum, I'm sure, it surprises people, and then they think of Quantum Leap and things like that. American TV show, sorry. But on the other hand, as you say, this is a real thing. And now that we've seen, the world's most powerful countries sort of commit to investing in quantum and taking it seriously, I think that divide has to come in. But how do you?
I'll give you my favourite example of this.
Yeah.
When I was a banker in 1997, I raised, I think it was £100 million for Mercury 1-to-1, one of the early mobile phone networks in the UK. And it was my job to persuade a syndicate of banks to invest in that loan. And I could not persuade the British banks that by 2006, mobile phone penetration would be 20%. That's what our forecast model said. It said, in 10 years' time, mobile phone penetration will be 20%. I couldn't persuade the British banks to invest in it. We ended up getting Japanese banks to buy it because they were a bit more carefree in those days about technology. Of course, by 2003, mobile phone penetration was already more than 100%. There is this instinct in markets to think that the future will be the same as the past very often. How can computers be 1,000 times more powerful than they were last year? That doesn't make sense. But there are always clever people that transform technology, and the future never looks like the past. The future is always many orders of magnitude different.
There you go. You heard it here first. And a final word from Philip?
Well, the final thing I would say is when I was looking at this technology 15 years ago in research, and I used to tell people what I did, they used to look at me and go, he's a weirdo, right? And I used to like plead to go and talk about my research and whatever, and I was the last person, maybe the last slot of the conference, that kind of thing, and an unknown conference. Now when you tell people, it's kind of like, oh, that's cool. What's that about? People are a little bit more interested. As the years go on, more and more people getting interested. And the reason for that is because the more people can see it, feel it, they see the stories, they see the technology developing, they start to change their opinion around it, and they start to think, actually, this can impact me, this can impact my business. It's kind of exactly the same as generative AI, right? Generative AI had this turning point over the last, whenever it was, 12 months ago or so. Transformers existed for years before that. When you try to talk to people about what Transformers did and the capabilities of generative AI, no one cared, no one really invested in it, no one was like, this has no impact. As soon as it got into people's hands, everything went boom, right? And everyone everywhere is now doing generative AI. Almost every technology company in the world has got AI in their name somewhere or their product because of this. And so there will be a sea change in quantum when the first thing is broken, the first demonstration of quantum advantage is demonstrated, and people can kind of see it's real. We had a little glimpse of that when Google demonstrated their quantum supremacy in 2019. The caveat on that, it wasn't a real problem and it was kind of artificial. But if that happens on a real commercial scale for a real problem, we'll see this huge, change in the landscape, and that's what that's kind of what we're waiting for. It will happen, but you've got to have that innovative mindset to be there before before it hits.
But unfortunately, quantum computers haven't yet arrived, which means we can't go backwards in time just yet, and we're out of time. So that leaves me to say thank you very much to our panel. It's been a really interesting conversation. And if you could we're all going to make our way off, but I'm now going to hand over to Kate Day, the Deputy Editor-in-Chief for Politico, to wrap things up. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Izzy, and thank you to all our speakers. It's been a fantastic afternoon, really energizing discussion. For me, the best of what we're trying to do with Politico, looking ahead a bit, trying to be a bit smarter about what's coming in the future, looking right in the weeds of regulation. We love that kind of detail. We love how it collides with politics. I enjoyed the optimism in this room for Britain. We share that at Politico, maybe in a slightly different way, but we certainly think there's going to be plenty for us to write about in the coming years, and have been expanding our teams in London considerably, led in finance by Izzy, but with others. And we've got a new UK financial services subscription product coming early in the new year, which I'm doing the final bit of recruiting for. So it's really fun to see that team coming together. I'm not going to keep you long from drinks. Please join us for drinks downstairs. But I wanted to take this opportunity again to thank our speakers and also our sponsors, our leading partner Nationwide, and our presenting partners, ARKIT and MFA. Without them, this wouldn't happen. It's been wonderful to see you all. I hope the conversation continues in the bar. So please head downstairs, enjoy a cocktail and some more discussion. Thank you very much indeed.